In 1787, beneath the marbled corridors of Schloss Schönbrunn in Vienna, a girl of 13 was quietly erased from court records, her body interred without ceremony, her name forbidden to be spoken aloud. She was listed simply as a niece removed, no coroner's reports, no mourners, no trace. Her disappearance marked the fifth such vanishing in only 2 years, all among the bastard daughters of Imperial aides and chambermaids. Before we continue, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one. What happened behind those polished mirrors and velvet drapes, the ones history chose to forget? They called it the Gilded Silence, an unspoken policy whispered only after dark, when the wine made tongues heavy and the guards looked away. These girls were not accidents, nor were they merely invisible. They were curated absences, selected by eyes too discerning, too familiar, and discarded before they could speak. Palace staff spoke in code, referring to autumn leaves as the time when a girl might vanish. Investigators arrived once in 1786, officially to inspect kitchen records after a pantry fire. They left 3 days later with a sealed letter, 2 broken fingers, and a bribe large enough to purchase a vineyard in Lower Austria. No questions were asked. By winter of 1788, whispers traveled from the palace kitchens to the catacombs of Vienna's ossuaries. Servants spoke of a nameless man who came each month under moonless skies, cloaked in a cassock, stripped of religious insignia, carrying only a lead ledger and a vial sealed in wax. He never spoke. He only watching the maids scrub floors, watching the nurses change linens, watching the youngest girls recite scripture in the nursery corridor. When one went missing, he crossed her name with the tip of a bone-handled pen. One mother, a wet nurse named Lise, followed him once and came back trembling, speaking of ritual rooms beneath the west wing, rooms older than the palace walls. No one believed her, until her infant was found drowned in cream. In June of 1789, a scandal ripened behind the cathedral walls of Stephansdom. A novice priest, just 23 and newly initiated, was found lifeless beneath the crypt in a pool of clotted altar wine, his chest carved with a Latin phrase scraped backwards into his skin, cor decipit, the heart deceives. His confessor, Father Anselm, vanished the same night, along with a volume of church records dating back to 1772. Coincidentally, the year the Empress's secret pregnancy was first rumored along the servant grapevine. The connection was never drawn aloud, but those who knew the older priests spoke of confessionals used not for absolution, but for selection of the purest vessel. All pulpits were scrubbed, and every mirrored chalice melted down to cleanse temptation, according to an edict issued 3 weeks later. Still, some say you can hear 2 voices murmuring beneath the evening mass. One in prayer, one in pain. The year turned, and with it came the frost-bitten quiet of 1790. But beneath Vienna's powdered civility, blood bloomed like ink through linen. The Empress, aged 52, succumbed to a sudden decline, officially recorded as melancholic fever, yet her final physician, Dr. Mothner, whispered to his barber that her tongue had turned black and her fingernails brittle, signs not of illness, but ingestion. Just weeks prior, she had dismissed a particularly radiant lady-in-waiting, Clara, age 16, whose real lineage was a tightly coiled rumor. Some claimed she was the Empress's own granddaughter by incestuous misstep, hidden through generations of falsified titles and forged marriages. Clara was last seen gripping a rosary with teeth marks carved into the beads, weeping before an empty cradle meant for a royal heir who had never existed. What was born instead, some whispered, was prophecy a curse, sealed in silk and passed down silently, womb to womb, history to hush. In October that same year, a fire broke out in the court library, destroying precisely 1 quadrant section 4, shelf D, containing genealogical scrolls tied to domestic externals, a euphemism used for unacknowledged relations within the Habsburg court. The blaze was contained within 32 minutes, and strangely, the room was already vacant, its contents removed hours earlier by unknown hands wearing velvet gloves. A boy, 11, who claimed to witness the removal, was later found mute in the palace's deer garden, his face caked in ash, clutching a page untouched by fire. The page bore a single name, Margaretha von Stein, annotated in red wax with the phrase, "unlined cradle." Vienna's elite dismissed the fire as coincidence, the boy as touched, and the ledger as myth, but those who cleaned the soot from the marble arches swore the walls bled for days, and under candlelight, the pattern of scorch marks resembled a woman nursing shadows. Beneath the elegance, the empire had a rot it could not name, one that fed not on revolution or war, but on its own silken children. By the spring of 1791, a new force crept through Schönbrunn's halls, not of man or mandate, but of memory. Judith, a laundress aged 27, began documenting what she called the Echo Ledger, a weather-stained booklet sewn from scraps of discarded parchment. Each week, she listed names. Annika, aged 9, vanished after a choir recital. Cecily, 14, last seen beneath a painting of Street Agatha tied and bleeding. But it was the entry for May 3rd that never left the ledger's final page. Magdalene, 12. Eyes open, mouth sewn. That night, Judith sang no lullabies. She doused her garments in lye, tore holy pages from their bindings, and whispered herself into a fugue. When the palace guards found her days later, she was kneeling in the chapel clerestory, surrounded by salt circles and infant shoes, chanting a forbidden psalm once used in exorcisms. The entry was stricken from all official accounts, but the Echo Ledger appeared again years later, hidden within the bones of a reliquary. Magdalene's name remained uncrossed. Because some wounds are not closed, they are archived, carefully, hemmed in silk and shadow, waiting for the next child to carry the secret forward. In the chill of November 1792, an anonymous parcel arrived at the doorstep of the Imperial School for Girls, addressed in trembling script to the headmistress, Baroness von Elsner. Inside were 6 teeth, milk-white but rootless, wrapped in a kerchief embroidered with the Empress's monogram. Alongside them, a torn fragment of parchment read only, "Cleanse what you crown." No sender was recorded. That winter, the school's chapel shuttered its confessional doors, and no services were held for the remainder of the year. Yet each morning, bouquets of nightshade appeared at its altar. One pupil, Ilse 10, mute since birth, began scrawling images of a veiled woman carrying a headless doll, always drawn in charcoal, always staring left. Her drawings ceased abruptly after she suffered a seizure during midnight prayer. When the physician examined her, he whispered that her tongue bore 3 perfect punctures, evenly spaced and curiously bloodless. The school was closed that spring, under the guise of renovations. But behind the locked iron gates, the bells rang every dusk, though no hand pulled their ropes. In history's polished telling, those halls were repurposed into a conservatory, but locals, even now, cross themselves when passing that block, muttering of a place where silence still sings, and girls are born knowing too much. By 1793, Vienna's salons whispered of a composer's daughter who played sonatas no one had taught her, each piece echoing funeral hymns lost to time. The girl, Emilia, was 8 and blind in one eye, said to hum in Latin during sleep. Her governess, Marta, aged 34 and newly widowed, kept meticulous journals until they ended abruptly on March 18th with 4 words: "The music hears back." On that same day, the palace conservator shattered a mirror in the emperor's chamber, claiming a girl's reflection had beckoned him forward, mouthing something wordless. He was confined for madness, babbling about the cradle unfinished, and a face stitched from different ages. 2 months later, Emilia vanished during a masquerade ball, her mask found perched on the edge of the Laenzer Tiergarten, beside a trail of sheet music. No one could identify harmonies written in ink that did not fade, even in rain. Today, her melody remains among the library's unidentified fragments, catalogued under etheric anomalies, Imperial period. And sometimes, when dusk falls cold and a piano key depresses without touch, Museum staff remember her name aloud, against protocol. Because even now, centuries later, there are nights when Vienna forgets to sleep and the silence listens back. In the dying light of September 1794, as the green of summer bled into autumn's muted gold, a letter surfaced in the estate of Count Friedhelm Franz, sealed not with wax but with a human molar pressed into pitch. Its handwriting sloped like drowning tides. The letter referred cryptically to a chamber beneath the emperor's private greenhouse, a vault, nourished by the unforgiven. It read where roots pulsed without sunlight and orchids bloomed only in whisper. When investigators reluctantly descended, accompanied by 3 clerics and a map scrawled on vellum skin, they found no chamber. Yet one of the clerics, Brother Otto, had been blind from birth and insisted he saw colors in the dark red, thick as memory, and a vivid blue humming inside the stone. He died hours later, spine arched, eyes open, mouth packed, with chrysanthemum petals. The visit was never logged. The greenhouse was burned for pest control the next day. But in winter, gardeners reported new growth among the ashes, flowers unlike any in the royal botany, petals shaped like open mouths, roots coiled around bones. And at night, beneath the rasp of wind against stained glass, they claimed to hear lullabies rising not from earth but beneath it, because the empire's gardens were always more crypt than Eden, blooming so beautifully only because they were fed by what no one dared remember. In February of 1795, the last tapestries were taken down from the palace's Hall of Saints, not for cleaning, but because behind one, a servant boy had found a fresco previously unknown to the archivists. It depicted the Virgin surrounded not by angels, but by 5 infants, each with tongues split like serpents, each crowned with laurels of flame. The fresco bore a signature, O.F., the initials of a painter believed dead since 1761 after his heart was found pinned to a canvas. Within days, the servant boy recanted his discovery, claiming he had dreamt it, though his fingernails remained stained in the ochre unique to imperial commissions. In the final weeks before the turn of the century, Schönbrunn hosted no public gatherings. Its halls, once echoing with music and murmurs, stood silent. Those who passed the salon spoke of chandeliers that swayed without wind, of cries muffled behind closed doors. When the new century dawned, it did so quietly, and for the first time in decades, not a single girl under the age of 14 resided within palace walls. Not for lack of lineage, but because every cradle had been broken, every record blurred, every truth rewritten under gold leaf and vain prayers. What they called legacy was only the echo of forgotten names, stitched into tapestries no one dared hang again. And in that silence, the empire finally heard what it had long buried, the cost of beauty and the blood that carved its frame. That spring, an archivist named Dieter Brugner disappeared inside the imperial crypt. His task had been simple: restore the oxidized nameplates and log discrepancies from the family tomb ledgers. But Brugner, aged 41 and known for his unswerving precision, never returned home. His lantern was found still lit before the vault of Leopoldine, the empress's rumored sister who had died in infancy, though physicians had once sworn she breathed for 6 months. When guards searched for Brugner, they instead found a stairwell lower than any previously mapped, carved into limestone and slick with condensation. At the base stood a door marred by age, yet latched from the inside. They broke it down. Beyond it lay no room, just a hollow circular space where sound fell flat and the air burned cold. Beneath the stone was a pattern, chiseled but incomplete, echoing a motif first seen on that vanished fresco: 5 serpent-tongued infants in flame. The records team buried the entrance in plaster, then silence. But months later, 5 unmarked stone cribs appeared beside the empress's own sarcophagus, each lined with ash and lace. They bore no names, no flowers, only teeth. History says nothing of them. But in Vienna, if you walk past the crypt after dusk, some still claim to hear lullabies deep in the stone, not sung to ease sleep, but to remember who will never wake. In October of 1796, A final blot of ink closed the century's darkest ledger. Hidden in the folds of an heirloom Bible gifted to Crown Prince Franz, a folded page fell loose during Mass. It was brittle, rust-stained at every crease, and composed in 3 scripts: Latin, German, and a cipher no scholar would claim. The message named no witness, no author, only epochs. 1294, 1441, 1610, 1787. 4 generations fed, 1 yet to hunger. The royal chaplain hid the page in his cassock and attempted to burn it that night. But the flames snuffed each time it neared the parchment. Days later, he was found in his study with eyes boiled white and palms fused in prayer. No documents remained. Yet inside the chapel walls, faint outlines were noticed anew, figures behind frescoes, faint hands reaching through the blue. The royal family relocated that winter, citing renovations and poor air quality. The chapel was sealed. Not a soul was buried in Schönbrunn again. And so it ended not with rebellion or decree, but with retreat and breathless guilt. What cannot be confessed cannot be absolved, and what is buried wrong returns wrong beneath palaces, through daughters, into lullabies. No one dares hear twice. The empire did not fall by sword or revolution. It rotted, tenderly, like roses with waxed petals, beautiful, perfumed, and already dead. And still, 2 centuries later, in the hidden rooms of Vienna's oldest archives, certain drawers stick without reason. One in particular, drawer 9G of the Habsburg estate inventory, sealed tight behind brass handles, corroded by invisible hands. In 2003, during a renovation meant to digitize remaining ledgers, an assistant named Helena pried it open. Inside, a single braid of black hair tied with silk ribbon, a rosary of opal beads clouded like cataracts, and a child's drawing on lambskin parchment depicting 5 cribs suspended midair over a cradle of knives, each crib occupied by shadows turned toward the viewer. No record showed why the drawer had been sealed, or who placed the contents there. The room's temperature dropped 12 degrees, and Helena, 31 and newly pregnant, collapsed before she could catalog anything. Her child was never born. The case was dismissed as a spontaneous illness, and renovations ended. Yet those who enter the archives today still avoid 9G, citing a metallic taste in the air and the echo of weeping from nowhere at all. The empire itself may be gone, its titles and tapestries dissolved into time, but the stain it left, mute, feminine, motherless, remains etched in stone and silence. Because some legacies do not fade. They wait, they reach, and they remember what was buried in velvet and shame long after the last lullaby has ended. In the archives beneath the Tyrolean State Museum, a final whisper surfaced in 2017. A mislabeled crate, tagged for disposal, bore a torn sticker, Schönbrunn, dormant. Inside were 3 items: a taxidermy lamb missing its eyes, a velvet bonnet singed at the brim, and a bound folio titled in fading ink, For the Unbaptized. The folio, when opened, contained what the restoration team described as a lullaby, in notation not musical, but anatomical, tracing names against fetal diagrams, each shaded in shades of indigo and dried crimson. Beside one sketch were 7 words, etched in what tests confirmed as infant tooth enamel. She was born, and so the door opened. That room was sealed again by museum order, and all staff reassigned. But outside, beneath gray skies and the rust of autumn, a paper doll was found dangling from the iron rail, cut into the shape of a girl with no mouth, cradling a serpent. The empire's song, it seemed, had never really ended, only softened itself into echo, and though its cradle lies shattered and buried, the silence it bred still vibrates low beneath Austria's spires. A resonance not of sound, but of memory. Because in Vienna, history does not sleep. It waits, in rooms with no key, humming lullabies in a language only the forgotten understand. And the question is not what was done, but what still listens beneath the gold, the marble, the hymns. Not everything that dies stays buried. Some things, especially secrets, choose to bloom. In 2020, a redevelopment project in Vienna's Landstrasse district unearthed what builders called anomaly stonework beneath a former ecclesiastical orphanage. What they did not report was a vaulted chamber behind it, sealed not with mortar, but with infant bones interlaced like lattice. Inside was a single crib carved from basalt, surrounded by concentric rings of whisper-thin parchment. On them, a name repeated 79 times: Anneliese. No records exist of any child by that name in the institution's 100-year history. Yet when the parchment was dusted, one sheet lifted on its own, revealing a drawing of the Schönbrunn palace floor plan with a circle scratched beneath the Hall of Saints. The discovery was wiped from city records within days, but one worker, now living in exile, recalled a final sound that emerged just before authorities sealed the crypt. Not a scream, not a cry, but a nursery rhyme sung off-key in the voice of something ancient, unfinished, and impossibly young. They say the air there still won't hold prayers, and perhaps that's fitting, because in the Empire's final breath echo the same words written on that last circle of vellum: "We were never meant to forget, only to outlive the forgetting." Now, every few years, something unclassified goes missing from the Habsburg's lowest vault papers mislabeled. Artifacts misplaced. Names misfiled into oblivion. Archivists come and go. Stories whispered over espresso and smudged ledger slips. But one pattern persists. Whenever someone requests access to Section 23D, a grave, quiet shelf nestled beneath deactivated surveillance, they're either reassigned within a week or vanish from internal records entirely. No incident reports, no resignations filed, just gaps shaped like people. In 2023, a digital audit flagged a corrupted file in the Imperial burial archive. Upon investigation, the appointee Ivan Keller, 28, recently promoted, downloaded the file onto a secure drive. He opened it once. What appeared was a single image. A woman, pale as ash, seated before 5 empty cradles, her eyes blank, her smile too wide. Ivan has not spoken since. The file cannot be deleted. It duplicates itself into any connected drive, each time altering slightly, adding another crib. This isn't merely history. It is recursion, alive and watching, listening, still hungry. And if you feel cold now, if some part of you listens too closely, then maybe, just maybe, it remembers you back. Some truths are not lost. They are kept, patiently, waiting to be heard again. So the archives remain, sealed yet breathing, full of pages that bleed through maps and monarchs alike. Beneath Vienna's opulent rot, something endures not just in cradles and catacombs, but in the simple, silent things: a child's breath against frosted glass, a half-hummed tune mistaken for wind, a locked drawer that whispers the name of someone never born. Some say it was never about crimes, but about inheritance that the Empire passed down more than titles. It passed hunger, memory, and shame dressed in silk. Somewhere, far below where frescoes once wept and lullabies hardened to scripture, a door remains unopened, only because no one dares remember the key. But memory is patient, and the silence, as ever, listens, because the Empire may be buried, but its daughters are not. Perhaps that is the final scandal forgotten not by time, but by design. Not erased, but woven into the margins beneath the gold leaf crests and lacquered archives that misname horror as heritage. You may ask, what truth lives through centuries of silence? The answer, stitched in cribs long crumbled and lullabies barely remembered, is simple. Legacy is not what is preserved, but what refuses to die. The Empire spun itself grand, baroque illusions and brocade lies, but in the cold beneath its spires, in the hush between midnight bells, its daughters still echo teethless, tongueless, but not voiceless. Their names remain uncatalogued, their stories forbidden, their grief ancestral. And one day, When candles gutter out in the archives, and someone hears their name spoken from nowhere, they will wake, not to forgive, but to be known. Because corruption does not vanish. It festers, flowering in marble silence, and history's darkest footnote was never a revolution. It was a cradle, empty and waiting. So if you ever find yourself walking the cobbled streets near Stephansdom after dusk, and the bells hush a moment too long, listen, not with your ears, but with whatever part of you still believes that paper remembers touch and stone remembers blood. The wind may carry a strain of lullaby, cracked and hollow, sung in a tongue the world once silenced. Do not turn toward it. Do not answer. For some echoes are not meant to be followed. They are warnings, not invitations. And every empire, no matter how gilded or grand, leaves something behind it that cannot be buried, only sealed. Until, as always, the daughter returns. Not to reclaim, but to remind. The cradle was never empty. It was waiting all along. And so this tale, woven in silk and silence, ends where all forbidden histories do not with certainty, but with a question echoed by every shuttered cradle and sealed door. What was the empire protecting? Or, more chilling still, what was it feeding? Behind every anthem echoed in marble, every portrait grinning beneath layers of varnish, lies the throb of an unsung lament. The daughters were not erased. They were layered beneath the page, beneath the skin of Vienna itself, their lullabies threaded into the veins of every cobblestone and candlelit chapel. When cathedrals fall quiet and mirrors blur without cause, when children speak names they should not know, remember this was never fiction. It was architecture, tradition, legacy raised not on love or line, but on omission. The empire fell with its hands clean and its past embalmed in gold, but its heart, dark and deceitful, still beats beneath centuries of pretty lies. Not for vengeance, but for witness, because even buried, they keep singing. So remember this, as you pass through vaulted halls or idle beneath gilded chapels, not all echoes fade with time. Some grow sharper, more persistent. They latch onto the breath between generations, carried not by history books or statues, but through lullabies muttered in sleep and games little girls play in shadows. Count the cradles in your family's story. Listen for the name that skips a generation. When silence gathers in corners where language fails, know that it speaks still, not of fairy tales, but of ledgers sealed in marrow and laws penned in screams. This is not merely Austria's shame. It belongs to every empire that named its daughters ornaments, then buried them like debt. But the debt remains, and one day, when the whisper returns and the cradles shake with nothing inside them, we'll have to answer not to kings, not to priests, but to the children who remember what we chose to forget. So the last page closes, not with a period, but a pause, a breath held in marble, in silence, in a name never spoken aloud. Vienna still stands, polished and operatic, the grand facade intact. But anyone who's walked its back alleys at twilight, anyone who's heard footsteps echo without a source or found cradle-shaped shadows where no child sleeps, knows better. The story doesn't end here, because it cannot. History may forget, records may lie, but something someone remembers. A girl. A lullaby. A ledger line left uncrossed. Truth, after all, is patient. And some lullabies aren't sung to hush children to sleep. They are spells, invitations, and the whisper at their heart is not asking to be heard. It is demanding to be remembered. So leave this tale not with fear but recognition. Recognition that beneath every empire's grandeur lies a silence not golden, but guttural, a silence filled with names never written, lullabies never finished. Vienna wears its history like velvet, heavy and soundless, but the lining is skin-thin. And if ever, in quiet hours, a child hums a tune no one taught, or you wake from dreams of cradles rocking in empty rooms, know it is not just memory, it is inheritance. The pages are still turning, even now, not backward, not forward, but inward, because history never closes its mouth completely. It just learns how to sing with its teeth closed. And so the silence persists, not as an ending, but as a seed sown in stone, wrapped in velvet, fed by centuries of omission. Its roots spread beneath every plaque and garden, every prayer and procession, asking not for remembrance but for reckoning. What did the empire leave behind? Not just relics or ruins, but a heritage of erasure so precise it echoes as legacy. One last cradle, one last name, one last hum in the dark. These are the final artifacts. And if you listen, truly listen, beyond history's gilded hymns, you may hear what was never meant to be spoken, only endured. The lullaby is still playing. And somewhere, far beneath Vienna, someone is still listening.